What if civilization didn't begin the way we've always believed? What if everything we know about human history is incomplete? Because there is a place on Earth that challenges the very foundation of our past. In southeastern Turkey, near the modern city of Şanlıurfa, lies a quiet hill that, at first glance, looks completely ordinary. For centuries, nothing about it seemed important. No towering ruins, no visible structures, just dirt, rock, and silence. But beneath that hill, something was waiting. In 1963, a joint survey conducted by researchers from the University of Chicago and Istanbul University briefly examined the site. They noted scattered stones, but ultimately dismissed the location as a medieval cemetery. There was no indication that anything significant was buried there. For decades, the hill remained untouched, until 1994. That's when German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt arrived at the site. Unlike previous researchers, Schmidt suspected that something much older might be hidden beneath the surface. Almost immediately after excavation began, his instincts were proven right. What he uncovered was not a cemetery. It was something far older and far more complex than anyone expected. As layers of soil were carefully removed, massive stone pillars began to emerge. These were not small structures. Each pillar stood up to 16 feet tall and weighed as much as 16 tons. They were carved from solid limestone and arranged in large circular formations, some measuring over 60 feet in diameter. This wasn't random. This was design. And then came the discovery that changed everything. Radiocarbon dating of organic material found at the site revealed that Göbekli Tepe was built around 9600 BCE. That's over 11,000 years ago. To put that into perspective, Göbekli Tepe predates the Egyptian pyramids by more than 6,000 years. It predates Stonehenge by about 7,000 years. It exists at a time when, according to conventional history, humans were still living as nomadic hunter-gatherers. No cities, no writing, no metal tools, no established agriculture. And yet, somehow, they built this. As archaeologists continued their work, more structures were revealed. Each circular enclosure followed a similar pattern. Massive outer pillars forming a ring, and at the center, two even larger pillars standing face to face. But these weren't just stones. They were covered in carvings. Detailed, deliberate carvings. Animals dominated the imagery. Snakes slithering across the surface, foxes frozen mid-motion, birds with outstretched wings. Some figures appear aggressive, almost predatory. Others seem symbolic, as if representing something beyond the physical world. And then there are the central pillars. Unlike the others, these include subtle human-like features. Arms are carved along the sides, hands rest across the front. Some even display what appears to be clothing or belts. They are not just structures. They are representations, possibly of beings, possibly of something important. But here's where the mystery deepens. Despite the scale and complexity of the site, archaeologists found no evidence of permanent habitation. No houses, no hearths, no everyday tools that would suggest people lived there. No one stayed. Which raises an unsettling question. Why build something this massive in a place where no one lived? The deeper researchers studied Göbekli Tepe, the more unsettling the implications became. Because this wasn't just about an ancient structure. It was about timing. Everything about this site suggests organization, planning, coordination, the kind of effort that requires a shared purpose between large groups of people. Quarrying massive tush limestone blocks, transporting them across uneven terrain, carving detailed symbols into their surfaces, and then arranging them in precise circular layouts. None of this happens randomly. It requires knowledge. It requires communication. And most importantly, it requires intention. But according to the established timeline of human history, none of that should exist yet. And that's where the real problem begins. For decades, historians believed that human societies evolved in a clear sequence. First came small groups of hunter-gatherers, then agriculture, then permanent settlements, and finally, organized religion and complex structures. Göbekli Tepe reverses that order. And that changes everything. One of the most influential interpretations came from Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who led the excavation for over 2 decades. He proposed that Göbekli Tepe was not a place where people lived, but a place where people gathered. A ritual center, a sacred space, a location where different groups came together, possibly over long distances, for shared beliefs, ceremonies, or rituals. If this is true, it leads to a radical and uncomfortable idea. What if religion didn't emerge after civilization? but instead helped create it. Think about it. If large groups of people were traveling to this location regularly, they would need food. They would need resources. They would need some level of coordination. And that may have forced them to settle. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. In this scenario, Göbekli Tepe isn't the result of civilization. It's the reason civilization began. And there is evidence that supports this possibility. The region surrounding the site is one of the earliest known areas where wild wheat was domesticated. Genetic studies suggest that early forms of cultivated wheat can be traced back to this part of Anatolia around 9000 BCE. Some researchers believe that the need to feed large gatherings of people may have accelerated the development of agriculture. In other words, people didn't gather because they were farmers. They may have become farmers because they needed to gather. But even this explanation leaves major questions unanswered. Because when you look closer at Göbekli Tepe, you start to notice something else. Something harder to explain. The level of symbolism. The carvings found on the pillars are not random decorations. They are repeated, deliberate, and in many cases, positioned in ways that suggest meaning. Certain animals appear more frequently than others. Some are shown in aggressive or threatening poses. Others seem almost stylized, as if they represent something beyond their physical form. This suggests a shared system of symbols, a form of communication, possibly even an early belief system. Which raises another question. How did these groups, without writing, without formal language systems as we understand them, develop such complex symbolic expression? It implies something profound, that the human mind may have evolved culturally much faster than we once believed. But then, the mystery takes another turn. Because Göbekli Tepe didn't just fade away over time. It was buried, deliberately. Around 8000 BCE, the entire site was covered using massive amounts of soil, stone fragments, tools, and animal remains. The enclosures were filled in carefully, layer by layer. This wasn't the result of erosion. It wasn't a natural disaster. It was a decision. Someone chose to hide this place. And they didn't do it quickly. The process would have taken time, effort, coordination, which makes the question even more disturbing. Why would a civilization capable of building something this complex go to such lengths to bury it? Some researchers suggest it may have been a form of ritual closure, a symbolic ending, a way to retire the site after generations of use. Others believe environmental changes or shifting social structures made the location obsolete. But there is no definitive answer. And then there's one more detail that makes this even harder to ignore. Only a small portion of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. Estimates suggest that more than 90% of the site is still buried beneath the ground, which means everything we've seen so far is only a fraction of the full structure. There could be larger enclosures, more carvings, more symbols, possibly even something completely unexpected. And that leads to one final, unsettling thought. If a site this complex existed over 11,000 years ago, how many others might have existed and disappeared without a trace? History, as we understand it, is built on what we found. But what about everything we haven't? Göbekli Tepe doesn't just challenge the timeline of civilization. It exposes how fragile that timeline really is. Because all it takes is one discovery to change everything we thought we knew.